Hello guys, I'm going to be doing a very quick pixel art tutorial today. It will still be 2 hours because art is something that takes literally years to learn, but I'm going to try condensing it within like an hour and then have another like breakout session after that. So bear with me as I kind of rush through it all and just, let you guys like stew and all that. If you don't get any of the concepts, that's all good. I'll have the slides available pretty soon alongside the recordings as long as like our editor gets it online. Yeah. So I hope you guys are excited for this. This is the table of contents. First we'll go over the introduction, obviously, just give you like a little precursor on what pixel art is. Then like cover the fundamentals of art. This is more general, just like what art can be for you guys. Then have a little breakout session where you get to actually make some art. Very quick, just to like get you guys like used to the software or just doing pixel art in general. Then we'll be going over like more specific pixel art skills that you might want. Then applying those skills in like tangible forms like making slimes and stuff. And then have another breakout session, and then just like finish it off with some practices. First of all, why pixels? So pixel art is a great way to basically just draw really quickly, right? It's really simple to set up and pick up, and you can make a lot of assets using it. Obviously, like if you played Minecraft or even like any of the indie games like Celeste or Eastward, you can see that they all use pixel art in some method or not. Minecraft technically is a 3D game, but all the textures are made with pixel art. So, if you want to like have a very like retro vibe to your game, go for pixel art. It instantly feels like really gamey to use if you're like trying to make some games. And it's just great if you are new to art and you want to try something out, right? You might also want to consider that it's just like a really fun medium. The reason why I like this medium is because like it's so easy to create with, like it can offer like a lot of simple but really complex ways of like drawing. Like you can see here, it's made with pixels, but that is a bit hard to do. And then obviously over here you can see like a wide variety of different styles and kind of vibes that you can go for when you're making pixel art. Like, I hope that you will at least try your hand today and enjoy doing that. And I hope you will at least learn that there's a lot of directions you can go with pixel art if you ever decide to like pursue it in the future. So a little precursor. So this is a little concept called the abyss. So mentality is a pretty integral part of like when you're drawing, right? Regardless of like if it's creative or non-creative, it's important to have a good mental mindset towards whatever you're doing. You might have like a few thoughts approaching this, like, oh, what if I'm not good enough for this? Or, oh, it's gonna be so difficult. Or I'm not good enough to do this specific skill. Or like, I'm never gonna be as good enough as like this person. Who cares, right? Many artists are going to stumble against these thoughts. They might even have like imposter syndrome because of it. And it can be like tough and demotivating to wrangle with sometimes. Sometimes you might even feel like giving up. But really, these are just abyss statements. They're shallow, they're superficial, they can't really be measured quantitatively or qualitatively. Like most of our self-doubts and critiques are not objective, right? So these aren't really great like gauges of our ability when it comes to making art or doing any activity. It's important to potentially acknowledge the abyss, right? Abyss statements inherently are demoralizing, and they serve no purpose towards like progressing as an artist. So there's a few like things I want you guys to keep in mind when you're making art or just doing anything in general. First of all, frustration will happen at any stage. Whenever, even if you're like making art or just like doing your overall art journey or just even doing like maybe game dev, it's important that you don't beat yourself up for like having those frustrations or abyssal thoughts. Lord knows you need more of that. And the majority of people will experience these feelings, sometimes frequently, right? Like if you have anxiety or if you just are an overthinker or you just feel inadequate, it's very easy to slip into a mindset of like, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't really do shit. Oh no. And also like detecting failure or inadequacy is inevitable, especially when you're like trying to improve your skills, right? There's a lot of factors to making a drawing, especially pixel art, or even like complex art, or even 3D art, or whatever. Thus, there's a lot of ways you can technically fail or do poorly. But we are always learning at every skill level. So it's important that we contextualize our failings as learning opportunities and see those as like ways that we can improve our skills. Like, the more you learn, the more like the more it becomes obvious where your like shortcomings and like flaws might be. But that's fine. I think that's an important thing that you have to consider when you're making art or like progressing in any skill. Then you can try to tame the abyss. See, abyss statements are unconstructive, right? They don't really serve any purpose towards like guiding you towards improving your art. So if you have like abyssal thoughts, you might try to like analyze them one by one for the utility, right? You should like try to judge them by their value, not how accurate they feel or how they just feel in general. And sometimes your art is gonna suck, and I think you just have to make peace with it, recalibrate your expectations, and just keep on moving forward when it comes to making art. And this is like also just a really good practice for dealing with negative thoughts in general, which is like seeing the kind of abstract and shitty thoughts that you might be having, and then just being like, is this actually really that useful for me to think? Or is this just me feeling shit and punching myself for feeling shit, you know? So then it might be, it's really important that you try to reframe your thoughts to build a more like critical and constructive inner voice. Consider like tangible and like objective critiques of what you're doing, instead of like really opinionated or abstract or really emotional language. Try to build like really workable goals or directions out of the strengths and weaknesses of whatever activity you're doing or the piece that you're working on. So that might be the example that we'll cover later. And also just don't be scared to like reach out for help and like other people's critique. Like I think we're all very friendly and we'll all try to provide you guys a bit more help when it comes to making art, right? So example, you know, like you can be like, oh, this piece I made is really bad, like the lighting is shit. That doesn't really tell you where to go from that critique, right? So rather you might try to like frame it in a different way. You can be like, okay, well, I think I need to study more lighting examples similar to this so that I can use this to improve my work and fix my shading, right? The latter response is much more like constructive and gives you like an actual like direction to go, rather than just thinking, hey, this is not good. I don't know what to do, but this is great. This is not great. And yeah, there's like two pathways when it comes to making art. You can either just treat this as a hobby, you know, just enjoy the fact that it's a fun, like expressive activity, you know, make like art, make OCs, whatever you want. Just have fun with it, you know? Or you can try to be a bit more serious about it, you know, try to improve your art, like practicing regularly, exploring concepts and techniques you've never done, or even just becoming your own worst critic, like aware of like the shortcomings that you have with the art. This takes a lot of mental discipline and strength, so it might be the tougher path, but it might feel like there are separate paths, and following one means like sacrificing the other, but that's not really the case. In reality, you're in charge of like what you end up doing when it comes to your art. You don't have to go on one path or the other. You can decide to do both. You dictate your expectations and you dictate your pace at which you make your art and learn and do anything, right? It's important to work and play equally, as you might have heard from like other sources, so that you can both like feel fulfilled with what you're doing when it comes like to art, and also just feel like you're actually progressing and moving forward with your skills. And obviously, it's just your art. It's not anyone else's. You don't owe anyone a specific standard to which your art should be. Just do it for yourself. If you feel like you're improving, that's good. If you don't feel like you're improving, then just continue working on it in your own pace and in your own way, right? Yeah, like art is a tough like thing to do. So, and especially like a lot of you guys are probably quite new to it. So it's good to just, you know, step back and be like, wow, I should really cut myself a break and just enjoy this for what it is, and enjoy it and be proud of the fact that I'm making art instead of like not, you know. In terms of software, like really quickly, I use Aspray. It's like a paid software that is very like pixel art related. I've given you guys all like LibreSpray. It's a open source alternative, which is basically the same, but like missing a few features. But also like if you just can't use that software, you can obviously, if you can't use the software, you can obviously use other alternatives like Photoshop or Krita or even Pixel Edit or like some other online sources like Piskel and Lowspec. There's a lot of software outside for making art, but I recommend these two the most for making pixel art specifically. And this is some of the work I've made. So most of this is just like game jam stuff. Like this one was for like a tower shooter. That one was for like a bird university. And then the chef head was also for the tower shooter, where it's like very like cookie like related. This one's for like an arcade game, like Temple Vibe we had. And then the Kermit, and then this one is just gifts I made for my friends. And like these two are just, you know, like little doodles I had when I was just like feeling like good. So, you know, I'm like having a mixture of like utilitarian uses for pixel art and also just you know, like something to give to my friends or just even enjoy for myself. Like, I think it's a great way to enjoy like making art and making quickly. Yeah. So, the essences of art. This is gonna be like a very quick like walkthrough of the fundamentals of art. So first, I want you guys to potentially call out some aspects of art that you might see in this. Like, for example, I see color. What else might be important for building art? It can be a wrong answer, it can be a right answer, because there are no wrong answers. Shape, okay, that's good. That's actually quite good, yeah. What else? Shading, that's really solid, yeah. Anything else? Angle, okay. I didn't think about that one, but that's a fair point. Go on. Composition, that's really good, yeah. One more? Narrative, okay. Damn, we're getting pretty deep with that. All right. Throughout this tutorial, I will try to cover some of those bases. For this section, we will be covering these more simpler aspects. So right as you guys said, shape, shading, and colors. Obviously, narrative, angle, oh God, what else? All those other things, composition, those all factor into making the art. But right now, what you immediately see might just be the colors or the kind of shading that you might be using or like the kind of shapes that you've used to draw the art, right? These are very important elements and they can be tough to master individually, so let's get into them. First of all, hue, saturation, and value. So this is like the three aspects that you might like think of when you're using color, right? Hue defines the identity that might be like if you're using yellow, you're using yellow. If you're using blue or brown or gray or whatever, those are technically kind of like hues, right? It's just like the pure hue that you might see in that red to blue to red kind of spectrum. Think of that, the rainbow. Then you have saturation. That defines like the vibrancy of the color, right? How strong it is. Like you have gray, which is like nothing. It's got no saturation at all. And then you can move more towards like making it blue, making it purple, or yellow, or whatever, just increasing the saturation so it becomes more and more obvious what the hue is. Then you also have value. And value I would consider is the most important thing. That is the brightness of a color. And as humans, we are all kind of geared to focus on value more than anything, and then hue, and then saturation. But value is kind of important because, you know, it defines like what might be bright, what might be dark, what might be in between, right? Yeah, like a huge difference in values might be useful for like when you're making art. So these are all like pretty important elements when you're creating color. Then you might have a palette. Palettes are basically just like a collection of colors that you might use when you're making the art, right? For example, we've got the game Hue over here. It literally just tries to use all the different colors there, but it doesn't actually use any other like sort of in-betweens. It doesn't use like a really dark blue. It just uses blue and black, or yellow and black, or yellow and white, and it kind of just sticks to that. So you can see that hue can be like a pretty important like element when you like decide to make the art. Alternatively, you have Helltaker here. They wanted to do like a very hellish vibe, so they restricted the palette more towards like yellows and reds and kind of grays and purples. And yeah, like when you're making the palette, it is important to consider how many hues you'll be using, or is it going to be monochromatic, like a sort of Game Boy, or just black and white. You might also consider like how bright and saturated will you make it. You know, like this piece over here, you can see like it's got really strong reds, but also like grays and everything around that. And what hues might be the most prominent in this picture. So here they try to like lean a lot towards like having really reddish elements. But you can see like there's a bit of blues and yellows like leaking into that picture, among like a few others. So consider like what are like the most important hues and how bright and saturated you make each of them. Then you might also consider harmony, like how might all these colors kind of combine together? How might you pair them? How might you like specifically select colors, you know? A pretty common one is complementary colors, right? So red and yellow, or yellow and purple. Oh, sorry, red and green, or yellow and purple, or blue and orange. It's a great way to kind of just establish like something that will just look appealing to your eyes. And even if you're like, yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, like you might want to consider like how these colors might harmonize, or even just like what their overall temperature is, right? Like sometimes certain colors look warmer than others, especially if you like kind of compare them to each other. Like the yellow-green over there might be technically cool, but it will still look like more warmer than like a pure blue, right? Or that red and orange, that might look like more hot than the purple down there. So it's important to like consider all these different elements when you're like creating a palette. And then, yeah, you might want to consider like the kind of restrictions that you might impose on your palette. Here you have like a very pixel artish. This is Shovel Knight, right? Like they use a very retro palette, so they've restricted it to like I think somewhere like 32 or 64 different colors. So it's a very small like range of colors that they use and very specific types of colors they use. But then you also have like other games and stuff that just use a very wide variety of colors and just don't give a shit about restricting it. So it's up to you what kind of aesthetic you want for your game, but keep this in mind when you're deciding to make it. Then you might have lighting or shadow. Now, I'm pretty sure you've all taken a shower, right? Begging you have taken a shower. So you all know what it feels like to be in a shower. You know, like when you're like facing the shower head or something, and you can feel like part of your face is wet, and then the rest of your body is dry. Lighting is sort of like that. You know, there's going to be a part of the light that is dry and a part of the light that is wet or active. So you can kind of compare a shower head to a light source. You know, think about, as long as like you just assume like the water doesn't have gravity or just doesn't kind of roll off your skin, just think of it like that, you know? Totally perfect. But yeah, you can kind of idealize that shower head into a sort of light source. So you can see there are like a few like shadows being formed here as well. Here, you got the light source right here, or at least where the shower head was. So this is called a form shadow. This is like a shadow that's cast by your body just not facing the light source. Alternatively, you can also have a cast shadow. That's a shadow formed when you have a body that's preventing another like object from receiving light. So that part of the like receiving object is just going to be blocked off. So that's a cast shadow. These are like kind of important. It's just terminology if you wanted to know it. You might also consider the kind of source types that you might be using. So, you know, shower head, that was more like spreading from the spout, like it's all going in like in one direction or like multiple directions. Whereas rainfall, that might be only going in a single direction, right? Just maybe downwards or maybe a bit of an angle, you know? You can kind of idealize that into the sort of lighting. So there are technically two-ish kind of types of lighting. There is point lighting, which is, you know, as we said, like light bulbs or torches. It is just one light source and you are underneath it, and if you move around, the light source kind of like follows you in a way. Or you have direct lighting, which is just simply directional, like sunlight. And that will vary by like the time of day, but that's mostly just the angle of where it's coming from. You might also consider the lighting direction, you know? Changing the lighting direction or the position of the light source will obviously change what parts of the object are cast in shadow. So obviously if you're like coming from an angle for some direct lighting, only part of this ball will be like hit with water or light. And then part of this umbrella will be hit with water or light. And it's more of like the right side. But if it's just coming from like totally up, like overhead, then only the umbrella is going to be receiving all the water, and the object is kind of dry from all of it. You might also consider like bounce lighting. So that's kind of like lighting that's from the environment. So like any stray raindrops that kind of bounce off a surface and then like go onto your body. That's like very soft lighting. It's a bit of a complex topic, which I'm not going to get into, but you know, that also is like a factor you might want to consider when you're like deciding out the lighting. And also consider intensity. So the strength of the light source impacts how visible it is going to be on your object. The more further away you go from something, from the light source, the less strong it's going to be. Light sort of like falls off exponentially. So if you get like really far away, at a certain point, the light, like the difference between like light levels from if I'm standing here to if I stand a bit further away will kind of be negligible. It's just, you know, think of it like, when you're using your phone's torch in like the dark, right? If you stand away from your torch, it's going to be way more dimmer than if you're standing really close to it. Additionally, you might also have a bit of ambient or environmental light. That's kind of the bounce lighting I was talking about. So, I mean, if you look at your arm, right? If you look at your arm and face it away from the light source, you can technically still see part of the arm, right? This is because there's technically lighting coming from all around you, from the environment being bounced off this wall, or just from the atmosphere. That kind of like allows your arm or like whatever object you have to be illuminated, and you can still partially see what's happening in the shadows of that object. It's a much weaker sort of lighting, obviously, but it is still important to factor in, especially if you have specific background colors or general light sources that kind of like, make up the ambience of the area. And this also defines like the brightness and the color of the shadow, right? So yeah, kind of like talking about intensity is like, yeah, if you have like a way smaller light source, or if it's much further, then it's just not gonna get as much brightness. And if you have a stronger source of light than that's overlaying like a weak source, obviously that's just gonna be kind of ignored. Like you prioritize the stronger source over the weak sources like light and kind of color. Here's a general example of like how I might like draw a bit of lighting on like a sphere. So it's turning a circle into a sphere, right? So like technically I can either start off with adding pure light to it or maybe pure shadow. Then I try to figure out the direction of the light. For this one, I want it to be like more from the top right. So I cast a bit of a shadow like that. And then I think about like maybe the kind of material it is. And this is a bit more of a complex topic, but if you have a really glossy material, you might want to add some highlights or some reflectivity. So like along the top line, you can see some highlights and a bit of like that bounce lighting on the bottom. But if it's like a really rough or matte material, then you don't give a shit about that, Finally, you might consider shape work, right? There are sort of two forms of shapes. You have the rigid shapes. These are like really straight shapes made of triangles, squares, quadrilaterals, etc., etc. They create like really harsh, jagged edges, which makes your object feel harsh and jagged, right? And it can also make it feel very manufactured or very solid. So you might use that for like rocks and like mechanical objects, etc., etc. Alternatively, you might want to consider organic forms. These are made of curves like circles, blobs, etc. They commonly make much more softer, much more malleable and lifelike objects like humans or just a cuddly pillow or whatever. Yeah, like you can see, like for an example, they're like drawing a cloud with just purely organic forms. And even though it's made in pixel art, you can still feel that it's very flowy and curvy. Finally, for this segment, I will just talk about referencing. It's really good to try and use references. So references are basically images and props and things that you might find online or just in person to kind of just look at and see how you can draw your like art kind of like based on that. So if I want to draw myself, I might use a mirror like this artist is, and then, or even like just take a picture of myself and then just like constantly look at that picture just so I can like draw myself more accurately. If you're trying to draw like some objects like grass, you might pull up a shit ton of pictures of grass. It's really good to use a lot of references, and don't feel like this is cheating or anything. It's not. All artists use references, and they don't have to be perfect, but they just have to be enough so that you have like a bit of an idea on how to draw it. And yeah, like there's a lot of ways you can get references. You can see on the right, this is a very professional artist. They clearly use a shit ton of references, and it has really helped them like to maintain a very accurate and sort of like realistic painting style. On the right, you can see this is actually one of the artists for like a Spider-Man comic. He literally just posed himself in very goofy ways just to kind of like copy like his poses onto Spider-Man, and he just took pictures of them, and he was like, okay, well, this is good enough to like draw Spider-Man on, and turned out pretty well. So don't be afraid of using references, and don't feel embarrassed by using references. They're really powerful tools, and you should totally use them. You might also consider theme and style. So this is kind of the story that you were talking about. So there's two things, right? There's themes, which is like the ideas and like the motifs conveyed by your art. There's like all the hues and the saturations that you might pick, the kind of range of values that you might use, and even like all the sort of like more abstract elements, like the emotion, the story, the setting, the symbolism, the mood that you want to convey with your art. And that is often conveyed through the color, but it's also conveyed through maybe even style. So style can define like the tools and skills that you might use to present your art, and theme and style can go hand in hand, right? It offers you the choices to decide like how you might want to approach your art. Like, do you want to have line art or not? Do you want to make it color? Do you want to make it really realistic or make it really like cartoonish and abstract? Do you want to have a really high resolution, really high sharpness, etc.? And if you just think about like kind of genre or like ways you can make your art look unique to others, and even just like make it look more retro or more modern. It's ultimately up to you how you want to establish your theme and style, and every like game and like other artistic media will have unique art styles and unique themes, and yeah. For example, you can see over here, we got Shovel Knight. They have a very retro palette, as we mentioned earlier, but they also have a very retro like art style. It's very like black and white outlines and very bright colors, and just in general retaining that sort of like 1980s, like 1970s kind of vibe. But on the right, you have like Stardew Valley. It's much more modern. They use a lot more colors, a lot softer colors. It's not as harsh, and like the transitions between colors are not as harsh as like for Shovel Knight. So you can see like there's a lot of differences that you can establish when it comes to making art. Even here, you can see like this artist decided to use a very monochromatic palette. So they're only choosing to use basically like from like white to green to like a really dark purple. But on the right, you can see like they've kind of restricted themselves to like just basically 4 colors to show off a more dreamy and abstract vibe. So yeah, you can see like there's a lot of ways that you might want to establish your themes and styles, and feel free to experiment. It's always good to experiment and try out different things when you're making art. All right, we're gonna get into a bit of a pixel prompt. So we're gonna spend like 5 to 8 minutes drawing up something. So first of all, please load up LibreSprite. Open LibreSprite and create a new file, set both the width and the height to 32 or 64, and then click OK to make the canvas, if you can. All right. After that, you can obviously just draw by clicking and holding the pencil. You can grab colors from the left using the pre-made palette, or even just grab colors from the color select, up to you. And you can also choose tools from the right sidebar, and then click hold to maybe find more. Yeah. I was meant to have a sheet, but I forgot. But in general, just like mess around, try to have fun drawing the prompt, and we'll be wandering around, giving you a bit of help. So in the next like 5 to 8 minutes, try to draw a slime. And that, I will now move on to pixeling your pixels. Pickles. Yes, I can speak. This is a more in-depth guideline on how to make pixel art specific stuff, right? First of all, in general, this is more like a precursor again. It's good to have stages of work when you're doing pixel art, or anything in general, right? With pixel art, or just art in general, it's good to sort of have these steps. This is at least the steps that I use, but you can obviously use your own workflow. First of all, I try to find some references and conceive the idea. Actually, better yet, I'll explain it here. So this is my slime. You can see he's a little purple dude. And you can see the sort of steps I've taken. So in the first stage, I like did a really rough sketch. I just used like 2 ovals, and then I kind of just like started like messing around with it. I also like used a bunch of references just to see like what a slime is kind of like, right? And then I started giving it like a base color, started filling in the shape. Then I tried to introduce a bit of the lighting, figure out like where the lighting direction is. Then I start like, you know, fleshing it out, like fixing up the lines, adding more shading, adding like more complexity to the line work, you know, just adding more and more details as we're getting closer to the complete line. You can see like I'm trying to add like more and more elements to my palette and like the sort of bottom of these drawings. So in the start, we only had like the 1 or 2 colors, right? But towards the end, we go towards like 5 or 6 colors. Yeah, as you can see, I kind of just add more like features, like adding a face, keeping on tweaking the colors, keeping on like adjusting the positioning of like the face and stuff. And then yeah, in the end, we have like a final finished face, and just any last minute detail fixing, and voila, we have a slime. This is a more extended breakdown of the components of maybe this cat of Nya. As we already covered, there's colors and shape work and shading. But now we might consider more like advanced techniques like anti-aliasing, or how we constructed and having a workflow stages, or even like the detailing and the style and focus that we might want to implement. There are more pixel specific, so let's get into that. First of all, finding a palette. So if you guys are all using LibreSprite, or I guess Piskel, You can tell like there's a bit of a palette like on the left or right hand side or whatever. You can always find more on certain websites. I heavily recommend Lowspec. It's a really great way to just find a bunch of like color palettes ranging from literally just 2 to 4 colors to 32 to 64 to 128 to a shit ton, right? And they all like have a very different vibe depending on the palette. Some are more retro, some are more like modern, some are more like, you know, vibrant and passionate. Others are more like desaturated and like gray. You know, just try to find a palette that works to your needs and just start using that. And also just download and modify those palettes as you're progressing through your art, just so like it suits your piece better. Alternatively, you might want to make a palette. This can be like a sort of like rinse and repeat progress, like where you're constantly tweaking the colors that you're using and just like adjusting your palette depending on what features you might add or take away. First of all, you probably want to set the base colors. You know, this is the colors that you use when you're describing the palette or just describing the object itself. Like my slime was purple, right? So all my colors are going to be focused on like a sort of purplish range. Then you might want to consider the shadow color and the temperature. For my slime, I was considering like the shadows are kind of bluish, so I went towards a more bluish sort of like tone. And the temperature was obviously cool. Then I might want to consider the lighting color and the temperature. Typically, people just use sunlight as the lighting color, but you can obviously have like unique light sources, like maybe like sterile white or like a green light source or some other light color. Try to tend your palette towards that from the base color. And obviously you just have a ramp. So now you have a ramp going from, I guess for me, it was like a very pink to a purple to like a darkish purple. And then constantly tweak it as you're progressing with your art form, right? As you can see, when we go back to over here, you can see like I went from like a kind of bluish kind of purple to a more like yellowish purple by the end. So you can see like I've been like slowly like tweaking it and just modifying it just so it looks better for me and kind of communicates what I want in terms of the art intent, which is just a very purple pink slime. But yeah, it's always important to like also try adding more ramps and in sort of like a pixel art way, maybe offshooting those ramps from different parts of the palette that you already have. So here you can see like the ramp goes from like a very dark purple to like a blue and then towards white. But we decided let's just use like yellow as sort of one of the light colors for it and then like make a more like reddish ramp from that going towards purple again, but you know, going through red and orange and stuff. So it's great to like offshoot the ramps or do whatever you want with it. It's just, this is like a sort of like framework that you can use for making a palette. Then you might also want to consider the resolution. When it comes to increasing resolution, like you can see here, from like a 16 by 16 to a 64 by 64 like pixel resolution, this can help make your art feel more realistic and just more detailed and maybe nicer to look at. But the downside of doing that is that this exponentially increases your workload, right? The more pixels you introduce to your art, the more shit that you have to tweak when you're getting towards the end of your piece. And also just the more elements that you might add on and just make it super complicated. It also takes way more time, especially if you're making a lot of assets. And that's kind of important to consider when you're making a game, right? If you use like a very high resolution, like 64 by 64 for like just a single like tile in a tile set, that means you have to do 64 by 64 for like hundreds more tiles. So be smart about how you approach the resolution of your work. And if you're just making art for fun, then I guess this doesn't really matter as much, but it's also kind of like a stylistic choice, you know? Yeah. You might also consider like the outlines that you might want to use. Here we can see like sort of 4 variants of outline. First is just a black outline. It's a very retro vibe. You might see that in just, you know, more like old school games. Then you go towards like a solid colored outline. So this one's just like a very solid like purple. And then I'm gravitating more towards like introducing different colors along the outline, if you can kind of see. So like towards the top, I'm using much more like lighter colors for that outline. And towards the dark, I'm just going towards that same like dark purple as used in the previous one. And then in the last one, you can just see it has no outline. But you still can kind of feel like there's an outline because the outline sort of like dictates the shape of the art form. You might also want to consider jaggies and doubles. So there's a lot of mistakes that you can do when you're making art. If you want it to be like really smooth or just feel much more cleaner, you might want to try and eliminate all the little defects in your art. So jaggies are just like, like pixels kind of sticking out and not looking great. Whereas doubles are like when you have 2 pixels in an outline that's meant to be like 1 pixel wide. So the process is literally of like moving and elimination. So for a vertical one, you might want to just stick to a single straight line. For a diagonal line, you might want to try introducing like a stepping pattern. So here you can see it's like a sort of 1x2 gradient. So I try to do like 2 pixels vertically until I move over to the next vertical pixel and then to the next and the next. And you can see like I'm trying to like make that line much more smoother. And then on like the right, you can see it's a much weirder gradient. It's like 1 to like 2.5. So here I'm like trying to like balance out the stepping. So I do like 3 vertical lines, 3 pixels and then 2 pixels and then 3 pixels and 2 pixels and so on. It's like a sort of pattern, right? That's the steps that you kind of like introduce to this. And it just helps your art look much like nicer and cleaner. And this is more just for like straight lines. Oh, I guess we're missing the curve line part. Anyways, you might also want to consider adding anti-aliasing. So this is like a sort of like smoothing technique that a lot of computers use and a lot of pixel artists use. So you can see like on the right, we have like the typical A. Your computer might just introduce some anti-aliasing to make it much more smoother. But obviously as you zoom in, you can see like there's a lot more like colors or just like tones introduced to make it feel more smooth. So it can really help like make your rough lines, as long as you clean it up, into a much like smoother transition. And that's purely dependent on the kind of art style that you're using and if you want to have anti-aliasing or not, but it can just help, things feel smooth and nice. So yeah, as you can see, like in the diagonal lines, I try to introduce a bit of anti-aliasing here and there, just like in a pattern way, just like how we would stepping the diagonal to make it much more smoother. And in some parts of this diagonal on the bottom, it's quite skinny, right? And I just wanted to make it feel more smooth, so I decided to make parts of the line itself like a kind of gray as it kind of blends into the background instead of just being purely white. For straight lines, it's pretty simple to add anti-aliasing. If you're doing like diagonals that like have a pure pattern like this, pretty easy to just, oh, that ain't it. There we go. It might be easier to just like, introduce the anti-aliasing like this, where it's just like 1 pixel in between, or like if the diagonal is much more like steeper, then you introduce more and more pixels. But for like a more odd pattern like sort of diagonal, like, it goes like 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, then you might want to just add the anti-aliasing or just like, some sort of like in-between pixel, just to like sort of conserve that like sort of 3, 3, 3 vibe without making it like 3, 3, 3, if you kind of get what I mean. It's just a sort of like smoothing technique, right? And yeah, for curved lines, you might want to consider adding anti-aliasing to just make it feel more curved and much more smoother, like I said. Here you can see like I've added some anti-aliasing on like the sort of like points at which the curve goes from like kind of like one step pattern to another. So from when it goes from like 1, 1, 1 to 2, I added a bit of anti-aliasing. And even like on the curve, like if I wanted the turn to feel much more smoother, then I just add a bit of anti-aliasing within that curve, or like in which part of the bend I want it to feel smooth, just so, it just feels nicer. It's a great way to just make your art feel really smooth. Obviously, you can go pretty fucking hard with the anti-aliasing. You can introduce more and more colors to make it feel much more smoother. But it can also take more work to do, and it might actually detract from your piece because it adds a lot more complexity, especially if you're working in a smaller resolution or if you just don't want the object to feel as like smooth. So be smart about it. Think about how you're going to introduce your anti-aliasing, and try to control how much you're adding. Just make it way reduced like this, or keep it as smooth as this. Nope. There we go. Sort of finally, as I said, like cleaning your lines. This is the curve part. If you have like a really rough curve, you might choose to introduce like a sort of pattern here as well. So you can see like there's a bit of a mixed order with the curve over here. It's kind of going from like 4-ish to like 2 to like 1 to 2 to 3 or whatever. Just helps to make it like organized, you know, like go from like biggest to smallest to biggest again, if you kind of get what I mean. So here, like on the right, you can see like it's kind of going infinitely, and then suddenly it's going 2, and then 3, and then suddenly turns, and then now it's going 2, and then 1, and then 3. You might want to make the order much more transitory. So now it's going into like a 3 to a 2 to a 1 to a 2 to a 3, and that just makes like a much more smoother curve. This is dependent on like if you just want the curve to be much more circular or not. If you want the curve to feel rough or whatever element, then keep it like that. It's up to you. Also, potentially consider being smart with the sort of lighting that you do. It's important that you try to like avoid using light sources right in front of you or right above you, because when you start like shading the object, it can kind of make it feel really flat or just unpleasant to look at. So in the middle, you can see like that's kind of called pillow shading when you have like a light source that's right in front of you. And on the right, you can see this is called just banding gradient, where it's just a light source directly on top of you, so it just doesn't feel as great to look at. Also try to avoid, I guess, this kind of comes with intuition, just having a lot of banding like that. So banding is sort of like when you go through the different colors of your palette in the exact same length. So you can see like this is one wide, this is and then it's like another wide, and then it kind of just goes towards the base color, and then another like one wide, and then another one wide. So it kind of doesn't feel too great to look at, and it kind of feels flat again. So you might want to consider like kind of trimming away some parts of the banded color just so it doesn't look as flat. Anyways, yeah. How to use your pixel art skills. We already went through that, but you know, one way of drawing is obviously just combination, right? As we covered with the shapes earlier, there are some elementary shapes like triangles, squares, circles, or even just like sort of organic forms that you kind of just like muck up. You can try to combine all those together to make like a whole, right? Like I see the sword here. If I look at a picture of a sword, I can be like, okay, well the hilt is just a rectangle. The little like pommel is a circle. And then the blade itself is also like another rectangle. And then like the tip of the sword is like a triangle. So I might as well just combine that all together using those shapes and just make a sword from that. Here we got our mascot G. He's a little like artist dude. You can see like I try to replicate his triangular forms with just 2 triangles and then introduce like a circle for the eye. And then I add in like a bit of a rectangle for the like hat's like, I guess, base. And then I kind of just like make an organic form for like the rest of the hat. And that's kind of just like me messing around and like tweaking the positions of the pixels to just make it feel better. And then in the end, we have a G, you know, after adding some details. So yeah, you can see like how shapes can be a really powerful tool for just like combining and quickly making a shape, quickly making a piece of art without like feeling like you don't really have any direction for how to produce it. Alternatively, you can try using a skeleton or blobs of color when you're making like characters or creatures. It's a kind of intermediate like skill form where you use the skeleton of your body in like a really simplified way to kind of like mark out like where the pose of your character might be. And then once you have that placed down, you maybe like add in the limbs, and then you add in the silhouette of like the character, and then you kind of just wing it. You can see like here, this is an example by Soul Tunes. He just adds like a bit of a skeleton to the character, and then he wants to make a wizard, right? So he kind of just like mucks around and like adds a sort of silhouette for the wizard. He thinks about like how the silhouette looks even if like you don't have the skeleton or the features on it. So you can see like on the top right, it still sort of looks like a wizard because you got like a bit of a droopy form, and you got a bit of like a star. So you're like, oh, that's probably a wizard, huh? And then you can see like slowly he like transforms that silhouette into an outline, and then like slowly adds more and more features, and then like modifies a wizard just so it just feels nicer to look at. So it's like a sort of progressive stage, right? So you can use either of these methods to kind of create your characters or your objects or whatever you're doing. And then tile sets are also like a pretty popular thing to make with pixel art, right? You might want to consider like the kind of core tile sets that you might have, the core tiles that you might have in your piece, and then maybe like additional tiles that you might have. So here you can just see like for like either like a top down or just like a side scroller, you might just have like the elementary tiles, you know, like the ones that go for the side, the bottom, the corners, and then even the center and the top. And then here you can see like I've added tiles for like when the transition goes from like a flat to a wall, and et cetera, et cetera. And you can see like I've got some additional tiles for like if I just want the tile to be like one wide, you can consider like adding extra tiles for that. Just know that the more tiles you have to add and I guess replicate for all your different like types of materials, the more work it is. So be smart, maybe make the core tiles first, and then if you need to add additional tiles like this, then go for it. But otherwise, like, you know, be smart about it. It also helps to like sort of have like a base for the tile. So you can see on the right, this is an example by Saint 11. He has made like a sort of like central tile that would go in like the middle over here. So he tried to create that central tile, and he tried to make sure that it tiles in itself before he starts like modifying that tile, or like making copies of it and modifying it so that it can become like, you know, these pieces, or like the top or the sides or the corners or whatever, right? So you can see like he's like, yeah, he's just added more features until it feels like a nice like central tile, and then he started modifying it. He also like decided to like modify some of the tiles, so like if you want more variation with your tiles, you might consider like having the central piece have like different types of it or different copies of it. Just, you know, helps to make your art feel like more solid and less like repetitive. Yeah. Then 2 art check methods. I will suggest the squint test. So if you're really engrossed with like your art, right? If you're like really getting in the fucking zone with making your art, you're like, God, oh, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Please step away. Get away from your art and try to view it as a whole, right? Zoom out. Maybe you maybe really focus on like this 10% of the art when you have to really focus on like the 100%, right? Because you might be focusing on a really specific detail and not realize that, you know, a viewer is not really gonna like notice that piece or like that little like detail. So it's important to like consider the whole piece when you're making the artwork and not just specific parts of it. Obviously, there are gonna be areas that matter more for when you're making art than others. Like if you're making a human, the face is probably gonna matter more than like, I guess, the hands or the body. But it also depends on like what the focal point of the art piece is. So if you want the viewer to focus on like maybe the hand of the character, then maybe that's something you add more detail to. But otherwise, if it's something that the viewer or like you don't actually care about, like, I don't know, feet. I hope you're not a feet person, I don't know. You know, like, you don't have to put as much detail into like rendering the foot as like maybe the face or the hands, you know? Like, just find the priority of your artwork, zoom out, or even just squint your eyes. It helps to squint your eyes and maybe see everything as like sort of blurry forms, because then it sort of simplifies everything and you're like, oh, I don't know if that's a TV anymore, if that's just a rectangle, or I don't know if that's a character anymore, or that's just a really lumpy rock, you know? It helps to kind of like squint and just simplify your art. And if you squint and you can't really read your art from doing that, then it might be a sign that you might want to simplify the piece or just reduce the amount of details. And also, if you're making your art for a game, make sure it's readable in the native resolution. So if you have like a 16 by 16 tile, but the overall screen is like 360 by 270, then zoom out. Like put that 16 by 16 tile in that 360 by 270 screen and see what it looks like. And if it can't be read from that, like, I guess, resolution alone, then you might want to consider either changing the tile or just, you know, modifying it in some way. But that's a really good way to, like, you know, just make sure that your art looks good and is readable. Also, consider just stepping away, right? Sometimes you also get really engrossed in a specific part and you're just like, oh, I don't like how this looks. Oh, I don't know where to go with this. That's where the abyss comes back in, right? You don't want to consider like you don't want to like continue hyperfixating on something, especially if you've been staring at it for hours or just a really long time. Just take a break. I'm begging you, take a break. Do something else. Like another hobby, or just, I don't know, reading a book, or doing the homework that you've been putting off because you just want to draw a shit ton, you know, or make a game. Just do something else. And then let your mind like slowly process it on its own, right? The subconscious is an amazing thing because your mind will kind of naturally process things that you've been working on and have issues with. And it can kind of either come up with a solution with it, for it, or it can just try to figure out like what the actual issues with it are and then let you have a chance to target it, right? So yeah, stepping away gives you a chance to actively think about and process the abyssal thoughts you have, or just process it subconsciously. And also just as I guess as like a general guideline, like, you know, try stepping away every half hour. I think that's a pretty good amount of time. I think the human focus, like attention span, is like 30 minutes anyway. I know it's been ruined by TikTok, but you know. Okay, we're gonna have like a bit of a final breakout time, and then we will go over some further theory later. Very short, but I will give you one of 3 things to draw. I am missing the eyeballs, but you can imagine. So either draw yourself in a Mario art style, like Super Mario 3 Brothers, or try to draw a 16 by 16 tile set using the Pico 8 palette. If you don't know where to find palettes, remember, go to lowspec.com. Great place. Or alternatively, draw some funky eyeballs with some really eerie lighting and general creepy vibes. I will let you guys go for it for like, you know, another like 20 minutes. Make sure to use references. If you want me to like go over a specific concept again, I can come back to you and just like help you with that, or just elaborate further. And yeah, we'll be coming on to like help you for the rest of this. This is the last bit of like potential theory that you can learn when you're like doing pixel art, or just if you're serious about art. Yeah, let's get into it. First of all, if you're doing color, consider the inherent or the perceived value, right? It's more of a complex thing, but just kind of something you'll like intuitively pick up on. Consider pure blue versus pure yellow. What is gonna feel brighter to you? Probably the yellow, right? So whenever you're using your hues and your colors, and this is like more of a digital issue than anything, just think about the brightness of the color that you end up using, like the inherent brightness. Because the closer you get towards yellow, the brighter like all the hues kind of become, even if they're at the same value in your software. But also like if you're getting towards blue, then it's just going to become dark and like, you know, much more dingy. So just keep that in mind when you're like doing art. Additionally, you might want to consider your focal points and your composition. So here you can see like I'm trying to do a section on like the value of lighting. So light is a really good tool if you're doing like much more complicated art, where you want to make a where you want to like set a focus on something. So here on the left we have Sans Undertale, beloved figure, and you can see like the first thing you notice instantly is the glowing hand against like the dark background, and also the glowing eye in like the lid part of his face. So already your eyes like instantly attracted to that bit, and then you kind of move towards the rest of the piece. In the middle one, you can see like instantly your eyes maybe focus on the white figure in there with the little parasol. You're like, oh, who is she? What is she doing? And then you maybe focus on the rest of this picture. You see the swathes of like sunflowers and stuff. And you see like this blue figure that like stands out against all this yellow. That's a bit of like good contrast that you can use to just make your character stand out. And also, in this last one, we have like a character who's like slowly trying to climb up from a tree. You can also see it over there. No, that's cool. And he kind of like blends into the foreground, right? There's a lot of like very similar colors to his skin tone compared to like the rest of the scenery, but at the very least he stands out from the rest of the background because the background is so dark and like such more muted than this like very pale white bloodied landscape in which this man is like torridly like, you know, going towards this tree just for a bit of like respite. You might also consider the composition of your piece. For example, on the left, you can see we have a street going all the way up. I think this is like a New York street for like that really famous sunset that happens like once a year. And as you can see, like this perspective and the way the road is like in the center of the image and sort of like leads upwards, it kind of guides our vision towards maybe looking at the sky or just like analyzing the road more like specifically. And then like after you kind of look up towards the sky because it's so bright and so like eye-catching, then you might notice the rest of this image. So, you know, using value alongside kind of like smart composition, like having a good flow or having good directions, or even just like preparing it in a specific way, it can be really good. And on the right, you can see like this is a very simple example of like just basking the color, basking the character in light while the rest of the environment is dark, and that immediately puts focus on that character so that you might want to, you know, analyze it a bit closer and put all your attention towards it. You might also consider the framing that's used. So here on the left, we have the very beloved Last of Us show. So you can see, like, we got the two silhouettes of Joel and I forgot the other character, but you know, her, as they're framing Ellie in the middle, right? So the light that's like cast on her obviously just puts her in the focal point. And then obviously with the framing of these two characters, we feel like we're looking from behind and we're focusing on this specific character alone. The way the angle of the camera is like posed, just so you like, everything in the shot is posed in a way so that Ellie is framed in the middle and, you know, draws your attention. And even like on this right version, you can see like there's a character basking in a bit of pink light from the evening. And they kind of become like the focal point. But alongside that, you might also notice this like smaller character like in the darkness, but like with a small glowing like purple heart. And you can already read this picture as like, damn, like one person is longing for another or something akin to that, while like this person is like in the bright. You know that meme of like some dude like sitting in the bus being super depressed and like the other person is like looking in the light? Basically that vibe, right? Like that's a really effective like tool of just like of like communicating emotion, because like that person in the light, he's having the time of his life, while like the person in the dark, they're clearly very depressed and blue. And in fact, the colors of the scene really kind of evoke that emotion, right? So yeah, I was gonna do a shit ton more slides, but in general, there's just so many different topics to like cover, right? There's a lot more like there's a lot more avenues that you might want to explore when it comes to just making art, right? Of course, first of all, is animation. You might want to animate your art so you can use it for your games and stuff. Or you might also want to consider composition, like we were analyzing further. Anatomy is also a pretty important thing, especially if you're drawing characters or creatures or whatever. Thinking about the materials of your stuff is quite important when you're considering like the texture of the material. For pixel art, dithering and texture, those are kind of hard to like master, but they're really useful tools for like, you know, again, communicating the material and the texture of it. Complex lighting, like, you know, having bounce lighting or multiple light sources or colored lighting or just other stuff. Those are like key elements that you might want to like read more into if you want to have a much more fleshed out piece of art. Consider perspective as well. That's very important, especially if you're like trying to do art that's 3D or even like in a 2D piece of art. It's still important to like have a good like layering of the scene so that you can understand what's in the foreground and what's in the background. It's also good to just, you know, try to establish your style and make sure that you have healthy mindsets when it comes to making art. But most importantly, it's important to try and reinforce the concept that we learned today. There's a whole shit ton of world of knowledge that you can learn, right? But the core ones that we covered today, color, lighting, shape work, amongst like the other pixel art specifics like line work and just like positioning and palettes and all those are quite integral to making your art feel good in pixel art. You can try learning all these other elements. And in fact, some of these elements you will have to learn when you're trying to do a specific task like animation or like composition for like a more film-esque scene. But at the end of the day, focus on the core fundamentals, maybe research more into it if you're really serious about art. If you're not, like I said earlier, like at the start of this lesson, who cares? Try to have fun with it, right? Try to enjoy it. And yeah, attack it one at a time so you don't overwhelm yourself. And make sure you take breaks, make sure you're doing drawings for yourself, etc., etc. Just have a good time with it. Art is something that you should enjoy and be proud of. It's not something that should like demotivate you or stress you out too much. Obviously, if you're like trying to be like really serious about it, it can be stressful, but still, it's good to keep your mind open, but also just enjoy the parts of art that you enjoy. Additionally, there's going to be a lot of like other resources that you can access. Low spec, like I said, is good for palettes and also like general tools and like you know, like small guides. PAD, which is the Pixel Art Discord, if you just search a pixel art Discord, it's a really great platform. If you want to learn more about pixel art in a way that I obviously can't teach you here, they have like maybe 10,000 members or something. Really big server, growing all the time. They got a lot of events and stuff happening. It's a really great place if you want to meet more pixel artists and just see how you can improve your art and even ask them for help. Pixel Joint is like a nice, like more like older website if you want to go and find like some classical but still like really useful tutorials on pixel art. And also just if you want to post your artwork there, you can. You can also post it on Pixel Art Discord any way you want. Finally, you have our GDG drive, or just, you know, our server. I will try to post some additional materials on the server alongside like the recording of this tutorial and just the slides in general, just so you can come back to it if you want. So keep an eye on the Discord for that. And also just go on YouTube, search up more tutorials, search up more guides. There's a lot of resources out there that I obviously can't teach you. Like I said, this accumulating this knowledge has taken me a while, like a pretty long while. So I don't mean to demotivate you, but it just means like I can't really teach you all this stuff within this 2-hour span that we kind of covered today, right? So if you want to learn way more, you can always ask me, or you can just go on Discord or on YouTube to find more resources for that. Anyways, yeah, thank you so much for coming. Hope you guys like learned a bit. Hope you guys want to do more pixel art because of what I kind of covered tonight. Even if you don't, I hope you had fun, you know, just learning about art in general. And yeah, thank you so much.